Hello and welcome. Croeso to CJS Lew's live Facebook event, where today we'll be asking what's next for the hospitality and tourism sectors in Wales. When will we go on our holidays again? Trips to the pubs, restaurants? How will they cope after being closed for so long? I'm Mary Williams, and to answer all those questions, I'm delighted to be joined by our three guests today. Firstly, the Vice Chair of Cardiff's Hoteliers Association and Manager at Hotel Indigo in Cardiff, Tom Gaskell. And representing the pubs, we have the Chair of Cardiff's Licensees Forum and Manager at the well-known Philharmonic Bar in Cardiff, Nick Newman. And we also welcome the Welsh Conservative Shadow Minister for the Economy, Transport and Mid Wales, Russell George. And of course, we have a live audience on the Facebook feed, so please comment, ask your questions. We're really looking forward to hearing from you. Now, in the last hour, First Minister Mark Drakeford has announced some easing of the COVID-19 restrictions in Wales. But for tourism and hospitality, not much has changed. Mark Drakeford says that if numbers continue to improve, self-contained accommodation can open on March the 27th, just before Easter. But apart from that, there were no other indications of any immediate change. So, Nick Newman, will come to you first. What's your reaction to the announcement?
I've got to say, disappointed. My understanding really from listening to Welsh Government was that all the indicators regarding the virus were going in the right direction. And I hoped, all of my members hoped, that we might get at least some indication. I mean, the fact is, compared to England, there's no roadmap as to when we will reopen. And again, we can't quite see why. Businesses in England will be open outside from April the 12th. And we really do feel that we've done enough in Wales and in Cardiff in particular, where I work, and we felt that we've done enough to keep our venues safe. We proved that during the reopening phase from August to November last year. And we've put all the things in place that have been required of us. We don't even get an indication really from Welsh Government as to when we can think about reopening.
And Tom, we know that self-contained accommodation has been given the go-ahead. What do you make of this?
Well, the tourism industry welcomes the opportunity for self-contained accommodation to open. Obviously, that's brilliant for the tourism and the leisure-specific tourism that will benefit sunny South and North Wales over the coming months. For hotels in general, yes, it's an opportunity for us to reopen, but obviously that brings with it some really serious questions about whether or not it's financially viable to reopen. If we were to reopen our hotels with room service only, non-essential retail potentially will be open, or some part of it by then, but there'll be awful areas of the economy that won't be open. So if you're a city centre hotel, we have to make a decision as to whether or not it's viable for us to open. So clearly some very difficult decisions for the industry to continue with thinking about.
Now, Russell, your colleague Paul Davis said earlier this week that the tourism industry would be lost without a roadmap. Is the sector lost?
Well, it does need a roadmap for sure. I agree with Nick in terms of we know that there's roadmap. The UK government has a roadmap for England, and in fact, not just in England but in other parts of the UK. I think Wales is the only area of the UK that we haven't got that detailed plan and roadmap, and that's what we need with dates attached. I think what we had today was a rather confusing message, which is quite sad. I think what I would have liked today is a bit more hope and a bit more optimism, because we've been in this lockdown longer in Wales than any other part of the UK. Let's remember that. So there was an opportunity to perhaps open up sooner, given that the rates are coming down and we've been in a lockdown for a longer period of time. But what I wanted to see today is a bit more hope and a bit more optimism. There wasn't much announced today that we didn't already know, because much of what was said today was trailed in the news and through information being put out by the Welsh Government yesterday.
You're speaking there about hope and optimism, Russell. What would the Welsh Conservatives have done differently?
Well, I think the main issue for us was the roadmap and lack of detail. So if it was me being responsible and given the message at the platform today, I'd be saying, here we are, rates have come down, we've got a real sense for optimism here. This is our plan. We anticipate for this non-essential to be open on this date, hospitality on this date. These are the specific dates that will attach to those particular milestones. But please accept that if circumstances change and numbers change, then we'll have to change the plan and the roadmap. But at least you've got something to plan to and work towards. And what I would say is, for example, today we didn't see any movement on non-essential retail, and yet that had been kind of implied by the government that that was going to happen. So I feel that people will feel a bit frustrated that they've been perhaps had their hopes raised. So I think you've got to be really clear in a plan with dates attached, and with particularly with that information to say that if we don't reach these particular targets, then we will have to revise this plan. That's what I would have done if I was bringing forward the announcement today, and if I was the relevant minister responsible.
So Tom, what we all want to know, obviously, is when and if we're going to be able to go on holiday this year. So given the announcement, will self-contained accommodation be enough for you to start offering rooms to the public now?
Well, look, it will be an individual decision per hotel to make those decisions. I think if you were in a leisure location out near the seaside, it's a very easy decision. However, if you're a city centre location, economically, it's a very, very difficult decision for us to make. Certainly, if you take the capital, there isn't an awful lot for people to be doing. So if you're going to bring your family away, which we're all desperate to do, actually the question is, what are you going to be able to do when you get there? And actually, if you're just going to be able to sit in a bedroom and have some room service, whilst it might be a welcome break to not have to do the washing up, I don't feel that's going to drive any tourism. We also have to look at the sectors that drive tourism in Wales. Yes, there is a significant proportion of Welsh that will stay in Wales and be delighted to get away for a weekend or a short break. But a lot of our business is inbound from England, and as was alluded to today, you know, the government are actively looking at ways of making sure it happen. Now, clearly, we all understand that we don't want any significant increase in COVID rates. But as it's been alluded to today, the rates are down to 41.1, which is far below the rate the government set out in their original documentation that stated we would be at alert level 1. The announcement today doesn't even take us out of alert level 4. So the point's been made. It's very confusing for the public. We've set out an agenda, the Welsh Government set out an agenda about what would be the road, not a specific roadmap, but what points the data would start to look to reopen. And already what we're not doing is we're not seeing them adhering to the points that they raised earlier in this lockdown. So very confusing for everyone, to be honest. But from a hospitality point of view, it is great. If you're a caravan site and you have self-contained accommodation, that your guests will be welcome back, albeit with some significant restrictions as to what you can and can't do when you get there.
And Nick, no indication at all for you there in terms of dates for reopening. We know that in England, as you mentioned, pubs and restaurants can open outdoors from April the 12th. Were you expecting the same here in Wales?
Expecting would be too strong a way of putting it, I'm afraid. Hoping for the best is the situation we were in. I've got other concerns really about the fact that hospitality is not even being looked at, and we do quite often get dismissed by First Minister and others. I know in the committees quite often it's well, that's not even on the table, is the sort of stock response, without really giving any justification as to why. As I said, you know, we've proven ourselves to be a very safe sector. But I have this other great concern, and we see it as soon as the sun starts to shine, the illegal gatherings, which, you know, appear on the media. We see that on the TV shows, because of course there's no restrictions on the sale of alcohol through supermarkets and other outlets. And you do get this problem then of people congregating in an unlicensed and unmanaged way. That causes problems for the police and other authorities. And actually, in a funny way, sometimes there are, shall we say, influences that try and still point it back at hospitality in some way and say, well, that's what happens with drink. Well, actually, that's not what happens with it. It's what happens if drink is being consumed in an unmanaged way. And okay, I'm looking out my window now. We've just had another bit of a storm pass over, but come next weekend and come Easter, if the sun is shining in places like Cardiff Bay, look, we've all seen the images from Porthcawl and Ogmore and elsewhere last year. I'm afraid we'll start to see all that again. And, you know, I'm aware, I think that police and others are probably in favour of getting businesses reopened. Now, obviously, I can't speak for them, but they do have confidence in us. And I wonder why that message doesn't get through to Welsh Government, really.
Now, earlier this week, we spoke to a self-contained accommodation owner, Paula Warren. She owns a retreat in the Vale of Glamorgan, and she said that the lack of communication and uncertainty around when she could reopen has been really difficult to maintain her business. So, Russell, is the Welsh Government communicating enough with the sector?
No, it's not, in my view. I think the communication today was very poor as well. I mean, what we saw today was the Welsh Government effectively going back on something that they had earlier suggested in terms of non-retail opening, non-essential retail opening. So they do need to communicate better, and that's why we need a roadmap with a plan. And if you've got that plan with dates attached, then people know where they stand. I think, you know, from the business that you just talked about, I think people understand and appreciate that if the situation changes, then dates may have to change as well. But I think what we do need is that long-term recovery plan. This is not just about the here and now, it's about the future as well as we come out of the lockdown. We need a much longer-term plan, not just for when we're going to open, but beyond that in terms of how the sector is going to be supported. And, you know, I can hear Nick's frustrations there because, you know, his particular sector that he represents, they put huge sums of money invested into making themselves secure and safe, only then to be closed down. So I think I sense the frustration there. But no, I think, you know, obviously what's most important is public health. And I think we all understand that the restrictions that we've seen across the UK have to take place. But what businesses need is some degree of hope and certainty in terms of coming out of the lockdown.
Well, if you're just joining us now, this is CJS News' live Facebook event, and we're asking today, what's next for the tourism and hospitality sectors in Wales? And we've had comments and questions from the public on our live feed on Facebook, and keep them coming. But this first question is from Ellen Jones, and this goes to Tom. If restrictions ease, but then tighten again, would you be able to guarantee a full refund for any hotel bookings?
Mallory, I think the hotel industry in the UK has been phenomenal in its response to refunding guests. I speak on behalf of all of the hotels in Cardiff. Everyone that's wanted a refund has had a refund, or they've had the option to delay and move their booking to future dates. Now, clearly, if they've booked through a third party, that adds a little bit of confusion to the matter because it depends on where that transaction is held. But in truth, everyone has been refunded. So certainly we don't have any customers that are owed a refund if they wanted a refund. And certainly if there's customers out there that have bookings that haven't had a refund, I would suggest it's a good time to phone the hotel directly and they will support you in managing that. But yes, going forward, if there's any delays, most hotels now, we're not taking deposits. So the cancellation terms and conditions of those bookings have changed entirely. The way businesses and hotels operate have changed entirely during this pandemic. And actually, you're not being asked to put down a deposit for your hotel stay in the UK in general across the UK. Now, clearly, if you're an independent, that's your decision. But certainly the big brands in the UK are in truth not taking deposits in hotels.
And this next question is for Nick. Will we be allowed to sit indoors in pubs when they open? Will there be a limit on how many people can sit around a table and from how many different households? We know we don't have the answers to these, Nick, but what do you think? What worked for you last time?
Well, I do understand from meetings that take place in the hospitality call. I mean, we're not represented on that, but there are a select few that are, that the determination is that when we reopen, we will reopen with as few restrictions as possible. I think the problem is, though, that that's just pushing our opening date further and further back. I was just talking to a business today who's got businesses in England and in Wales. Now, they've done some calculations on what they're going to be able to they've got bookings as well. So what they're going to be able to take in the first few weeks of outside opening, significant amounts of money. But we won't have that in Wales. So the answer to your questioner is that, as you rightly pointed out, we don't know the answer. I understand that there is work going on so that we open inside and out, but there will be restrictions. Again, I think in a rather too dismissive way, we're told that 2 meters will still be in force. Again, we don't get the science for that. It's not proven. And other measures such as the masks, etc. But in a rather dismissive way. So even through the committees, I don't believe that these issues are properly dealt with. And again, as a result, we have a lack of clarity as to when we're going to open and how we're going to open. I'm fearful that there's not enough maybe political will through these committees to get to the heart of what it is that we need. We need certainty around when we're going to open and how we're going to open.
Now, Russell, we'll turn to travel. Mark Drakeford has been clear that he wants Boris Johnson to think very carefully before restarting international travel. Is the reopening of our borders very much an English decision only?
No, it is not, because and in fact travel restrictions are in terms of public health is a devolved matter. So the First Minister can determine himself what people have to do when they come in or out of the country when they get into Wales. So I don't accept that. It's easy to pass the buck on that. And of course, we've got our own airport as well in Cardiff.
So, Tom, Mark Drakeford confirmed earlier that English tourists wouldn't be able to visit Wales at Easter, even with the opening of self-contained accommodation. How important are visitors from England and the rest of the UK to hospitality and tourism and your business here in Wales?
Well, if I can start by saying that the latest SDR data for the UK suggests that the occupancy across the whole of the UK will only be at 45% this year. Now, if you take that since 2019, I mean, it's a horrific decline in volume. Now, that is impacted significantly by the inbound travel into the UK and, of course, the current lack of corporate travel. A lot of the conversations we're having and what are pertinent to the people in Wales right now is rightly about from a leisure point of view when I can go away, but from a business point of view, we're as reliant on the corporate travel as we are on the leisure travel. So all of that significantly hampers our hotel occupancy. Now, Wales is significantly dependent on travel from England, and I think all we found out today is that actually it's going to be very difficult for us going forward because the Welsh government are saying that we are not to be taking bookings for England. However, the booking model, that people don't phone to make reservations anymore. People book online through various third-party online travel agents. So actually, for us to understand exactly where these bookings are coming from, the guests don't have to put that information in. It's not a legal requirement to state your home address when you're putting those bookings in. So in some cases, we just don't know where our guests are coming from. And of course, at the moment, with restrictions, we don't have the resources to contact every guest to ascertain where they're coming from. So for us at hotel level to enforce this, it's extremely difficult. And we urge the Minister to send out some guidance urgently on how we are to enforce this, if that is what he is requesting us to do.
And Nick, I'll ask you the same question about how important tourists from across the border is. You know, we're in the middle of the Six Nations at the moment, more important than ever?
Of course, you know, I remember being interviewed by one of your colleagues in the last lockdown. You know, you've got a town on the border. Well, in fact, the border goes through the town, so you can have a drink in one pub and not another. So guess what people do? They vote with their feet and walk to the pub. Well, technically, I think that's not allowed. So I think it makes a bit of a mockery of it. But Cardiff is a huge destination centre, as we all know. Quite apart from the rugby, you know, we see tourists in the city throughout the year, and I'm really missing that, I've got to be honest. As somebody who's worked in St Mary Street for the best part of 40 years, it's a very, very strange experience. Yeah, we want to see the tourists back. Again, I'll repeat that we feel that we're safe enough to welcome customers back. And I've got to say, you know, in Cardiff, the council, the business improvement district, the police and others have really, really bent their backs to working alongside the businesses to get businesses reopened and to look at what they can do. The council have made extra space available outdoors, really at the drop of a hat. It's been a tremendous process. So again, when the sun is shining, we'll know the bottom end of High Street by the castle there will be, all the tables and chairs will be full. And again, I just don't understand why that can't be sooner rather than later.
Mm. And another question for you here, Nick, from the public. This is coming from Griffith McKee. Why are pubs always last to open?
Yes. Well, I know I'd like to put that question to. Look, again, the science is really there. I mean, much cleverer people than me have made calculations about air exchange rates. So the rate at which, air within a premises is changed and refreshed. It's certainly better than supermarkets and other places that get pretty congested. I understand it's even better than aircraft and other places. So, just the places I look after, we've got thermal imaging cameras. We all know about the sanitizer stations and all the rest of it. So I'm afraid I got no idea, other than that there is a colleague of mine who sometimes refers to our sector as the ugly cousin that never gets invited to a wedding. And because sometimes it's a bit too easy to point the finger at an industry that is based on alcohol. But we've proven ourselves time and time again to be safe venues, not just from the point of view of the virus, but in terms of managing people's behavior. You get a great welcome in our businesses, and a safe welcome too.
Well, we actually have another question for you here, Nick, from the public. This comes from Ernest Williams, and I think she's referring to those regulations that were in place before Christmas. And she'd like to know, what effect does not selling alcohol have in pubs and restaurants, and will alcohol be sold when they open?
Well, back at the time, I think I made the comment a few times that a pub that can't serve alcohol is not a pub anymore. Look, there are colleagues that have done well in terms of they might be more food-led, and they've done very well with that. I know plenty of businesses that have turned their hand to takeaways. But yeah, in simple terms, if you're a wet-led business, and most of the of city centre businesses are wet-led, it's a complete waste of time opening. Certainly the sort of 3 or 4 that I'm involved with, as soon as the decision was made that you could open but not serve alcohol, we just closed the doors. And of course, you've got all the subsequent loss of livelihoods. The majority of Cardiff licensees forum businesses are independents, and the majority of those are just owner operated. So you're talking about people whose mortgages sometimes might be on the line. And I understand that the government has to take everything into consideration. I get that Welsh Government is responsible for our health and hospitals and all the rest of it, but equally, they're responsible for the economy. I'm hugely fearful about what the pandemic is doing to the economy. I think it's incredible what the government has done in terms of furlough, in terms of business support. And, I bracket Welsh Government in there, of course, as well. The Economic Resilience Fund, that funds that have been made available have helped businesses, but we're not in business for handouts, and support of that nature is not going to put money into the exchequer. And that's what people your age, I should say, Larry, perhaps not so much mine, will be looking at paying for a long time. So accuracy is what's required in all this decision making. When is the right time to open? When is the right time to start getting money in the tills and into the exchequer?
And a question here for Russell from Anna Hughes. She's asking, will the opening of hospitality in pubs and restaurants inevitably contribute to a third wave?
Well, I suppose we don't know, but the hope is that it wouldn't do. And in fairness, what the Welsh Government and the UK Government have said, in fairness to both governments, is that they want this to be the last lockdown. And both governments have provided the message, we want to do this safely in order that we don't have to go back into a further lockdown later in the year. So I think that's welcome. But in terms of opening up our economy again, I think we need to be positive now. We've got the vaccination program across the UK is amongst the best in the world, and we've got sense to be optimistic and hopeful. As all adults in the UK will receive their a vaccination by the summer. This is fantastic news. So we need to be thinking longer term now about reopening our economy. And I think, certainly from my perspective, I think one of the best things that the government can do in Wales is to take, for example, the prospects of a tourism tax off the table. That's going to be doing nothing to regenerate our economy as we go, as we come out of this lockdown. Certainly, if you're in another part of the UK, you live in a region of England and you want to know where to go on holiday, do you go to Wales where there's a tax, or do you go to England where there's no tax? So there is no tax at the moment, but the Welsh government is still considering that. Let's take that off the table and sell Wales to the rest of the country as we come out of this pandemic.
And Tom, I'll just come to you to end for a reaction on that as well. With this third wave, is it inevitable with hospitality and tourism opening?
Well, look, I think Nick has made the point brilliantly. We've all invested huge amounts of money in making our businesses COVID safe. All our teams want to do is get back to serving customers and giving a great Welsh welcome and serving some great food in some great hotels or some great tourism businesses. And we're set, ready to go. And the sooner we're allowed to by the Welsh Government, we can get our teams back off furlough and back in work. And most importantly, that will be a huge increase in mental health for both the guests and for our team. And ultimately, that's what we want. We appreciate that it needs to be done in a COVID-safe environment, but all of the metrics suggest that the country is absolutely heading in the right direction. And I, for one, look forward to joining Nick for a beer at some point in the not too distant future.
Invite me as well, please.
Ross goes around, of course.
Well, that half an hour has flown by. Thank you so much to Russell, Tom and Nick for answering all our questions. And thank you at home for submitting your questions as well. And remember to follow us and all our stories on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. Find us at Broadcast CJS. Diolch yn fawr and good afternoon to you all. Pnawn da.